As the Gambia Football Federation election draws near, the five-man electoral committee has on Thursday briefed the media on the upcoming GFF election. During the briefing, the vice chairman of the GFF Electoral Committee, Sehubi Jaju, announces the date for the opening and closing of nominations.
Nomination will be opened on Thursday, 21st July 2022 at 9 a.m. and such nomination papers can be collected from the General Secretary every working days throughout. The closing of the nomination is set for Thursday, 28 July 2022 at 4 p.m. prompt, with such nomination papers to be submitted accordingly to the General Secretary of GFF. It's very important to note that the closing of the nomination is set for Thursday, 28 July 2022 at 4 p.m. sharp. The Electoral Committee will announce the list of qualified candidates in line with Article 12.1 of the Electoral Code on Thursday, 4th August 2022. On Thursday, 4th August 2022. This gives the candidates time, and this will give the candidates time should they wish to appeal the decision of the Electoral Committee. The final list of qualified candidates will be published on Saturday, 13 August 2022. The final list of qualified candidates will be published on Saturday, 13 August 2022. 5. The election date is set for Saturday, 27 August 2022, commencing 10 a.m. prompt. The venue for the election will be decided later and the public will be informed accordingly.
Mr. Jaju also shares the guidelines for the electoral process that needs to be respected.
For the election process, the following guidelines need to be observed by aspiring candidates. 1. Nomination papers can be collected daily from the General Secretary as said during working hours. 2. If a candidate collects a nomination paper or nomination papers, he or she will be issued a receipt to that effect. He or she will be given a receipt, will be issued a receipt to that effect. If the candidate submit nomination or return the nomination papers, he or she again will be issued another receipt confirming as such. 4. Each candidate must sign a declaration form to abide by the Electoral Code and the provisions relating to the election. 5. After the nomination of candidates, the Electoral Committee will publish the final list of qualified candidates 14 days before the election. 14 days before the election. 6. Those who want to contest for the election are advised to acquaint themselves with the following instruments, noting that the decision of the Electoral Committee is final, except it goes through the appealed board of the GFF. That is one. The instruments concerned is the GFF Constitution. They should acquaint themselves with that. The GFF Electoral Codes and the FIFA Codes of Ethics.
He informs that all candidates would undergo identification and eligibility checks, among others, as prescribed in their electoral code. The vice chairman further shares the limitations and points to be noted during the election.
Restrictions and points to note. Voting by proxy will not be allowed. Only delegates present will be entitled to vote. Elections will be conducted by secret ballot. Delegates must belong to the members that they represent and must have the authority of the body of that member to attend the General Assembly on his behalf. Members of the Executive Committee and the General Secretary can take part in the General Assembly without voting rights. We all know about that. They cannot be appointed as delegates to an association, to any of the association. All members shall be elected to serve in the office for a term of 4 years and shall be eligible for re-election only once.
Well, people have started complaining why the five-man electoral committee include the GFF Secretary General Lamin Jasseh. To that effect, the Electoral Committee said they have, on the 27th June 2022, received a letter of complaint from Mr. Sadibou Kamaso, an aspiring presidential candidate, asking for the Secretary General of GFF, Mr. Lamin Jasseh, to rescue himself from the Electoral Committee in the interest of fair play, because he was alleged to have been involved in a political campaign in favor of his opponent, the incumbent Lamin Kaba Bajo. Mr. Jajo explains why Mr. Jasseh is in their committee.
We have received on the 27th June 2022 a letter of complaint from one Mr. Sadibou Kamaso, an aspiring presidential candidate, asking for the General Secretary of GFF, Mr. Lamin Jasseh, to recuse or excuse himself from the Electoral Committee in the interest of fair play, because he was alleged to have been involved in a political campaign in favor of the incumbent. Whilst we noted his concern and had replied his letter accordingly, we want to assure the general public that, God willing, the Electoral Committee will conduct the election with all fairness and without any undue influence or interference from either party. It should be noted that it is in our best interest to protect our integrity moving forward. And then, given the situation as it had happened the last thing, I think WAFU, CAF, and FIFA have even endorsed the decisions taken by our previous body, given that the matter even went all the way to the court. But we feel that we were totally impartial to make sure that the best decision is passed across board, because it has nothing to do with any other thing but our personal integrity, and that we need to preserve and protect. On record, there is no single registered candidate, and we have not received any nomination of a candidate yet. And so we don't want to preempt a situation that we have no evidence of. That is in relation to the protest letter sent to us, which we replied accordingly. The Secretary General in the Electoral Committee was sanctioned by the General Assembly in the 2018 AGM. It's already spelled out in the Constitution. So his presence in our midst is merely to facilitate certain administrative matters on a consultative basis, as may be required, and nothing more.
The GFF Secretary General, Mr. Lamin Jasseh, also explains why he should be in the Electoral Committee.
I'm even baffled that my being the secretary of this committee has been challenged. I was really confused by it, because when the act came into force, that was in 2018, as you rightly said, it was very clear that the General Secretary and the Secretariat, the General Secretary served as the Secretary to the committee, and the Secretariat, it's not just the General Secretary. In fact, if I'm not here, I can even, identify people to come and support these people. The Electoral Committee doesn't have an office. The Electoral Committee is a judicial arm body of the Gambia Football Federation, just like the Appeals Committee. I'm a member of the Appeals Committee. I'm a secretary to the Appeals Committee, but I'm not a member. I don't vote in the appeals decision. I'm a secretary to the Legal Committee. I don't vote. I'm a secretary to the Disciplinary Committee. In fact, for your information, I'm secretary to all committees as per GFF Constitution. The General Secretary, I am secretary to the AGM, the supreme body of Gambia Football Federation. I'm the secretary. I'm secretary to the Executive Committee. I don't vote in the Executive Committee. I don't contribute in their decisions. The role I am serving in those committees is the same role that I'm serving here, consultation. If there are things that, for example, right now, if they need an information on a particular issue, I go and get those information for them. And also, let me tell you that this electoral code, even though it's been passed by the AGM, but all instruments of the Gambia Football Federation also must have to go to FIFA and CAF, because if these rules are contrary to the status of FIFA and CAF, they won't pass. We are also affiliated to CAF and FIFA. Just like clubs are affiliated to us, we are also affiliated to a bigger body. So, just for clarity, it is nothing like the chairman said, there's nothing new here. We are not inventing anything new. And as far as we know also, there are no candidates. Work of the Electoral Committee starts today. Kaba is not a candidate as far as I know, because no one nominated him. You become a candidate when you are nominated. He can aspire to be president, nothing stop him. You just need to resign from as a staff and tomorrow build his team. Anybody can. So this question of, or this issue of Mr. Jassy would be, to be specific to the letter, because this attacking my personality and my integrity, you know, that I would kind of have undue influence on these people, to influence them to make decisions that will be unfair to a particular person. I think it's an insult to them and an insult to me too, and then the institution. Because I can assure you, these people sitting here, you know, are not any pushovers. We worked before, and they did their work in accordance to the letter.
While the Electoral Committee is set to announce the list of qualified candidates on 4th August 2022, the election is slated for 27th August 2022. The Electoral Committee is responsible for scheduling an announcement of election dates and time, scrutinizing nominations credentials of candidates, and ensuring adherence to electoral code by all aspiring candidates. The committee is also responsible for the approval of qualified candidates, conducting free and fair elections, announcement of the results, and declaration of the winner before the General Assembly. Reporting for Kerr Fatou, I am Buba Gajigo.